always makes me nervous. So. Okay, I think it's looking like the live stream is almost up. And we're live, Chair. We can start whenever you'd like.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order our Mayor's Council meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded and traditional territory of the Halkomelem, Semiahmoo, and Squamish-speaking people. These refer to the language groups of the Indigenous people of many nations who inhabited and still live, work, and play on the lands in which TransLink operates. So as Mike indicated, we are live on YouTube. Carol, I just want to confirm that you've been able to take attendance.
Yes, Chair Cote, we have quorum.
Okay, wonderful. So we're going to move to adoption of the agenda. We do not have any public delegates this morning, so I'll move for adoption of the agenda minus agenda item number 2.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And it's carried. Moving to our minutes of our April 29th meeting, I'll look for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved and seconded, and I don't see any hands for any questions or corrections, so I will call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And it's carried. So we're now on to item 3.1 of our agenda, which is Transport 2050, the Phase 2 engagement update. And this, I'm going to pass it off to Jeff Cross.
Thank you, Chair. We have several slides that we'd like to go through. The purpose of today is just to really give you an overview of the activities and the participation levels that happened during the Phase 2 engagement that you see here ran for 4 weeks on Transport 2050. We will be delivering the full results to the Mayor's Council and the board through your committee work over the course of the summer, and then culminating in a full engagement report that we will post later in the summer and as part of Phase 3 in the fall. Just to the next slide, as a reminder, we're doing 3 phases. This wasn't originally necessarily the timeline, but we've adapted given the circumstances. Phase 1 was in the summer of 2019. We got suspended for a little bit here, but we've picked this up in Phase 2, where we tried to make the connection between what we heard in Phase 1 to how we're translating that through the work that we've done with you and with the board on developing the actual goals and actions. And then Phase 3 will be a much tighter turnaround, whereby we are going out this fall in coordination also with Metro Vancouver on Metro 2050. Next slide. This was intended really, we're calling it a pulse check, but it was a reminder on a couple of facets. So it was a very extensive engagement in round 1 with the public, the largest public engagement we've ever done. We wanted to make sure that people were aware of what we'd done with that work, how we had translated that into the theme of access for everyone with 5 goals, and then really focused in on the 3 transformative actions that we think are a very major departure from the business as usual that we've been doing, really around People First Streets, the new major transit network and interregional network, and the arrival of automated vehicles, and get a feel for where the public is and our stakeholders in that regard. So it was a much deeper dive into those things as opposed to a broad consultation at this point. Next slide. So we did, while it wasn't as deep as the phase 1, nor as what the phase 3 consultation will be, we wanted to make sure that we were getting a very good cross-section of conversations from across the region going on. So we used our typical channels, also relied on you in your roles as mayors at the municipalities to be amplifying the message and using your contact lists and your councils and your advisory committees to help us as well. We did use social media. We were out there quite actively and made sure that everybody had an opportunity. You can see that at the engagement, we had about 16,000 visits to the actual website, which is very solid and in line with what we were hoping for this round. Next slide. A couple things we want to highlight here on the approach. It was a very extensive survey. It took about 15 to 20 minutes for those of you that actually did it. I know you've had other channels to participate in this, but that's quite a commitment. So we're really appreciative of the number of people that did that. You can see we had about 5,000 of the surveys actually completed online. There were videos to support some of that as well to help with the questions. As always, we augmented that or complemented that with a public's opinion poll that will be representative of the region. We had a very significant discussion guide to support this. We did open houses. On the stakeholder front, we wanted to make sure that we went out there, given that the theme is access for everyone, and actively engage the voice and participation of different elements of the community that are not always fully represented. So you see that listed there. We really wanted to reach out to youth. This is a 2050 strategy, so the things that we're going to be doing in the next 30 years are going to disproportionately impact their lives. We had workshops with our Indigenous Advisory Committee. We worked with community leaders for social groups. We also did a council of councils, so to make sure that all the municipal councillors in the region were aware of where we're at this point. Next slide. As I mentioned, this is access for everyone. So we are looking at how the transportation system performs across a range of metrics and viewpoints. So what we will be doing now is going through and developing really in-depth analysis of who said what, so we can understand how those viewpoints differ by both your ability, your age, your gender, where you are within the region, what your income levels are, and what modes you currently rely on. So we'll be breaking that down over the course of the next couple of months and supplying you and the public with much more information from this round to support the development of the final draft strategy. Next slide. As I mentioned, so the phasing of this, we hope to be out roughly September with the full draft strategy, not just those 3 transformative moves, but actually the full goals, the strategies, the actions, the new networks for transit, for roads, for cycling, for walking, as well as our interregional services will all be part of that, seeking to get feedback over the course of the fall, complete that by the end of the year, and look for adoption probably around January with the board and the Mayor's Council. So we want, next slide, we really want to use this opportunity to thank you for amplifying our voice with this and your ongoing participation, as well as the public that spent a lot of time doing this. And that's it, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. So we'll now open it up. If there's any questions or comments from the council regarding the engagement program. And if there are no questions, I'll just move for a motion to receive the report.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, we're now going to move on to item 3.2 on the agenda, which is our ridership recovery update.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to start and then I'm going to turn it to our Manager of System Analytics, Teresa O'Reilly, to go through a short deck. This is our ongoing efforts to make you aware of where our ridership recovery forecasting is, the state of play. Obviously, there was very welcome news from the province in their 4-step restart program from Tuesday. I can talk at the end about some of the implications for us as we think about the ridership recovery on this. But we've been tracking very closely what's happening within our own region, and that happens to coincide today with the release of our annual transit service performance review, as well as doing our scenario planning, looking at different regions, how they've responded, and Teresa's going to go through some of that. And obviously, what are the implications for us as a region when we think about recovery on different modes, what transit services that we need to provide, and the demand that we should be anticipating over the course of the summer, fall, and into 2022. So over to you, Teresa. I think you're muted, Teresa.
I was, but now I'm not. Thank you so much, and good morning. As Jeff said, my name is Teresa O'Reilly, and I'm the Manager of System Analytics in the Transportation Planning and Policy Division. Pleasure to be here this morning. This presentation summarizes Ridership Recovery Update Report and includes some additional graphics that you haven't seen. Next, please. Oh, on that, nope, back one. No, slide 2. Okay, got it. Okay, as noted in the report, TransLink has been providing safe and reliable transit service for essential travel since the pandemic hit over a year ago. The Safe Start Agreement, supported by senior government funding, is maintaining pre-COVID service levels, and these service levels are what our customers are relying on. TransLink has launched many initiatives and innovations to limit the coronavirus transmission on transit. And these efforts are supporting customers' confidence in the system. And as a result, ridership recovery has been stable since last fall, and so have transit travel patterns. Next slide, please. Ridership is expected to grow as the pandemic wanes. And as we've all heard, Tuesday's much anticipated announcement about BC's restart plan is setting us up for that return to normal. And we're certainly looking forward to it. So with that, we are currently updating our forecasts. So some factors driving transit demand are more optimistic now, such as employment rates and news that post-secondary students will be returning to on-campus instruction in September. And of course, we'll be looking at the restart plan about how that guides our scenario planning. So some uncertainty remains around the amount of work from home. So how many days a week requires travel into the office, and any lingering apprehension about the virus. So if you do have to travel into the office, will this trip be a transit trip? Next slide, please. At our lowest ridership point in April of 2020, 75,000 essential workers were still dependent on transit to get to their jobs. And we're so happy that we were able to support them with that movement. And so the monthly ridership recovery that we've been tracking has been remarkably stable at 40% of 2019 boardings, even through BC's second and third waves. So ridership drops that we've seen in other parts of the country and around the world are associated with severe lockdown periods that BC was able to avoid. Next slide, please. Again, as Jeff mentioned, we're delighted today that we are able to release the 2020 Transit Service Performance Review, and this document details how the network has supported transit ridership recovery. The transit travel patterns remained remarkably similar to pre-pandemic travel. So the busiest bus routes are still the busiest. And the changes that we have seen in travel patterns demonstrate the importance of transit for people making those essential trips. Riderships on routes serving industrial areas, for example, have recovered to almost 70% of 2019 ridership. So we prioritized service on routes when and where customers needed it most. Next slide, please. In 2020, TransLink retained about 48% of its 2019 boardings. This was the second highest retention rate among the 10 busiest Canadian and US systems of urban regions. And TransLink retained its ranking at 4th per capita boardings and 6th in annual boardings, which is a feat on its own. Next slide, please. And last year, with upwards of 218 million boardings, even in this crisis, TransLink's 2020 ridership was almost equal to Seattle's 2019 pre-COVID annual boardings and ahead of Calgary's. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, ridership is forecasted to reach between 70 and 90% of pre-COVID. As mentioned earlier, we're in the midst of updating this forecast and the factors that influence transportation demand in Metro Vancouver. So we will still be producing 3 scenarios reflecting the range of possible ridership recovery. Next slide, please. Recovery is flourishing elsewhere, and we're looking to this as optimistic possibilities for what might happen in Metro Vancouver. So we understand TransLink's ridership recovery will be shaped by our local context, but just the same, we keep an eye on the experiences from elsewhere. So Auckland stands out as an example where ridership has snapped back quickly to 90%. Sydney has reached 75% at one point through the recovery, and systems like London and Melbourne have already reached a high of 50% at some point in their recovery as well. Next slide, please. Maintaining convenient, competitive, and safe service for essential travel has supported high ridership retention and stable recovery so far. In a recent market research that TransLink conducted, it suggests that customers considering a return to transit are looking for 3 qualities: fast and frequent service, on-time reliability, and safety cleanliness. So in short, high-quality service will be the key for ridership rebuilding. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Just a couple of points to emphasize with the announcement on Tuesday. That does align with our most optimistic timing that we've been tracking, where we were basically seeing sort of the restrictions in travel and from the medical guidance, et cetera, for openings by September. So that is very favorable for us, especially as it means both for ridership and our financial situation relative to our restart agreement with the province and the federal government. So we're very optimistic about that. We had also noted in the past, we've been tracking that we think the longer that the pandemic persisted, the more likely these new patterns would be to stick. So that's also a helpful news as we shift back. We'll be updating you over the course of the summer as we see if we do go per the plan that was announced, if we're starting to see a gradual return, and that will, I think, indicate what levels of service and requirement we'll see in the fall. Just on the transit service performance review, which is very extensive, goes route by route. Usually pick an average day. There was really no average day last year. So what we did is a slightly different approach where we took a section of the fall that was most stable, as Teresa pointed to, between September and November, and kind of looked at what the average was across that point, across the region. You know, we do think it's important to note where the patterns have persisted, where essential transit service is required to give us a better idea about the complexion of our users and how resilient they are or aren't towards the employment situation, et cetera. But it will be a little bit different than what we've done in the past, where we've updated all of our online tools that the municipalities use based on that transit service performance review. So that is now publicly posted. You got a draft of that, I know, in your inbox previously. Sarah Ross, our Director of System Planning, is also here if you have any detailed questions you'd like to ask at this point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Jeff. We'll open it up now. Mayor Harvey.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Jeff. Just been really puzzled with regards to what I'm hearing in my community, talking to a number of individuals, whether they're those that are working from home, and number that want to get back to the workplace as soon as possible, a number that actually want to stay working from home. And I was wondering if it's possible if TransLink could do a survey of the employers through the Mayor's Council, just asking each city, such as Delta, Surrey, all the membership, what are their plans for transitioning employees back to the workplace, and so far as timelines, and whether they're going to be asking for a full return as to what business was normal by people working it at the offices. And secondly, also ask for cooperation and support from our boards of trades and chambers of commerces, if they could survey their members. I think that'd be really useful information for us to get a picture of what employers are looking at now that we can actually think about recalling our employees back to work. So just your thoughts on that, please, Jeff.
Thank you, Mayor Harvey. You've hit the nail on the head. That is the largest dynamic, as Teresa was saying. The work from home and school from home will shape what the ultimate recovery of transit looks like compared to pre-COVID. I think we'd informed you previously that right now the middle of our scenarios kind of assumes that roughly on average, the people that can work from home will work from home about 1.5 days per week, which is very different than where we were prior to COVID, and that's why we'll be much less than our 100% previously. That is informed by survey work that we've been doing both with the province and with the boards of trades, to your suggestion. We'll continue to do so. We'll take that suggestion and see if we can do a more formal one as people start to develop their safety plans for the return this fall. But you've definitely hit it, that's the area of biggest risk as we think about what the demand will look like and what the overcrowding and service levels may need to be to accommodate that. So we'll take that away and make sure we're doing everything we can in that regard. It's helpful to have this memo of understanding with the province where we're working on this and they're able to share their economic information that's also pivoting off that as well.
Jeff, could you at least survey the member municipalities and cities here? I think that'd be useful
Absolutely.
information for all of us to have.
Will do.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Harvey. Director McCutcheon.
Thank you, and thank you, Jeff and Teresa, for that presentation. You spoke about sort of three things that are necessary for sort of return to ridership. Two of them are always necessary, and I think the piece that's new here is that the increased emphasis on safety and people's perceptions of germs and things have really changed over the last year. And I'm just wondering, are there additional ways that we can sort of emphasize the focus on safety and hygiene and stuff on transit, whether it's through public messaging, whether it's through data, if you have any data around sort of have there been any cases of transmission? I would doubt it, but on transit, can our either our provincial health officer or even the health authorities, can they be providing any support for TransLink to say that actually this is a safe way to go? And then I had a specific a minor question I'll ask after that.
I think Director McCutcheon, that's a good question, and Steve Vanagas has put on his camera who's developing our ridership recovery plan, so you can hit that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thanks for the question. Really good question. And first of all, know that we actually haven't documented any cases of COVID being contracted on our system, actually. But we have spent a lot of time on reassuring our customers and showing off what we're doing to keep our system safe. And we're going to keep doing that through the summer. We think it's really important that people feel comfortable to come back to the transit system. So we want to show them and remind them of all the measures that we've taken to keep the system safe, including cleaning procedures, ventilation, and so on. And we're going to keep doing that. That's an important part of our recovery strategies, make people feel comfortable about it. And then in the next step after that will be to get people to get back in the habit of taking transit again. We think people will want to get back on transit. We just have to give them good reasons to do that. So that will be our focus over the summer. You'll see more about that over the next few weeks.
Thank you. And Chair, if I may, just one more question. Teresa, I think this one's for you. Just on your report, I wasn't thinking about this when I read it in more detail, but are the comparisons across North America, are those per capita or are those absolute?
The per capita, there was one ranking that is per capita, and the ranking for the retention is absolute. So it's for annual boardings.
And I will add that on our actual ridership, which is 6th across North America, that's absolute, even though our population is roughly, I think we're 24th largest region. So we highlight that because also it's part of what underpins our forecast for retention of ridership or recovery. We are a transit-oriented region in many areas, and so that resilience we know gives us confidence in the forecast going forward.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Vandenbroek.
Great, thank you. Just, yeah, in regards to cleanliness, what's the situation with the copper? Are we going to continue with that?
Yeah. So I'll take that. Yeah, Mayor, we are planning right now a second phase trial, expanding the trial and working with some other agencies to do just that. We're continuing our work with UBC on that and they're expanding the trial to other transit systems and other locations as well. But we do have a phase 2 coming on that.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Buchanan.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the presentation, Jeff. I'm just curious on slide, I don't know what slide it is actually. It talks about recovery everywhere is encouraging. So Auckland, Sydney, are those based on sort of the same conditions that we're seeing here? Like universities are not in person, et cetera?
That's a great question. Thank you, Mayor Buchanan. It varies. So Auckland has been going through a full shutdown and then reopening. And London went through just a third phase where everything was shut down and is now slowly, well, very quickly reopening after its third phase because it has a vaccination as well, which is different from previous phases. So it does vary, and it is hard to say this is a one-for-one like response, which is why we'll be tracking TransLink's specific context in the region with the provincial restart plan and the resiliency of our own ridership, as we just looked at in the comparisons with other regions. We have quite a high transit ridership level compared to our very small population. So we're quite optimistic that we will see a high recovery shortly.
I think if I could add to that, Mayor Buchanan, to your point about universities. So yes, we are aware that Auckland, when they're not in lockdown, those brief periods, their universities are open and acting at this point normally. So it gives you an indicator of where the sort of full demand would look like. As we've said in the past, that is a huge driver for us. It's about 16% of our ridership is post-secondary institutes. That's not necessarily the same in London at this point. They're not necessarily in class yet. So they're kind of just a few months ahead of us, maybe.
Okay, and just on that point, I believe this afternoon, they're going to be announcing in terms of the intervals for the second dose. So we could see, I mean, I think we're on par to have everybody at least offered second dose by the end of September. So we're going to start to see the vaccination, full vaccination for people quicker than we originally anticipated. And so, you know, with schools all planning, universities all planning to be in full in-person for the fall, what kind of marketing, what are we doing in terms to make sure, because I'm assuming then all those university students will have their UPass still. And so what are we going to do to entice them? And then the 12-year-olds as well, because I think this is the market for us in terms of, I think return to work is going to be much a hybrid, you know, and that's going to be over a period of time. And I think how work life sort of falls out is going to be something we're going to have to be looking at and observing and assessing for the next 6, 12, 18 months. Whereas students we know are going to be at school.
Steve, do you want to hit that?
Yeah, absolutely. And really great points and great questions. And we are working through our plans right now for exactly that. We think that September is going to be a really, really big moment for us in terms of returning to ridership. We really want to make the most of that opportunity to get people back onto the system and feel comfortable about using transit once again. We want people to use transit as their first choice to go back to work, go back to campuses. So we do have some things in the works. I don't want to announce that right now because we're still finalizing some of the details, but I'm happy to bring that back to the next Mayor's Council meeting to go through that in more detail.
Great, thank you so much. This is very encouraging.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Buchanan, and really appreciate the update on the ridership and how we move forward given the state we are. I kind of feel we've been in a holding pattern for at least half a year when it comes to ridership as we've kind of worked through this year. But I think with the restart plan being announced and the efforts we're making with the vaccination, I feel this summer period and into the fall will hopefully be a really good turning point. I think we all recognize around this table the importance of winning back our riderships, making people feel comfortable and safe, and getting the riders back to the system. I think there's going to be some things that are not in our control, as Mary Harvey mentioned. Certainly there may be some trends, particularly related to work from home, that might have some longer term impacts there. But for the people that are getting back to transporting, we need to make sure that we get them back on our transit system. I think it's really encouraging to actually see some of the data comparing us to other Canadian and United States counterparts, where our ridership declines and so forth have actually been not as bad as some of the other locations there. So I think we've held on to a good base, but we're still obviously a long way away from getting to a more comfortable place. And I think this is important for a number of reasons. Certainly the importance of our transportation system, our funding model obviously does rely on transit fares, but I think the transportation system in general, because I think if we can't come back to the successes that we were having before, there's going to be a lot more congestion on our roads and a lot more challenges. So I think we have multiple reasons to wanting this restart to be successful as we move into a better place with the pandemic. So really appreciate the update. I only have one specific question. I know we've done a lot of work on limiting the capacity of our trains and buses during this time to make sure that social distancing can occur. And I guess I'm just wondering, thinking into the summer, into the fall, as we move into these different phases, whether some of those restrictions will start to be re-looked at and reevaluated.
That is one of the next steps. So with the announcement on Tuesday, we've started our conversations with BC Transit and with the province as well, just as we did when we took these steps in the spring last year, to how do we unwind them. We had a sense even when we developed the plan how we would do so. So we need to work with the medical guidance of the PHO, with the Ministry of Transportation, with BC Transit, to come up with a plan that makes sense for how we relax that and what the triggers are for doing so. As you pointed out, we're running roughly 50% of our capacity on C-Bus and SkyTrain, maybe about 2/3 on bus. So we want to make sure that we match the relaxation in those restrictions with when we think the demand will come, so that we're not imposing overcrowding or pass-ups on the system. And obviously we'll have to also make sure our guidance on mask requirements are in line with other agencies as well. So I think that'll be forthcoming in the weeks ahead.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And I know the staff teams are working hard on kind of the restart program and how we win back ridership, and look forward at the next Mayor's Council meeting to go more in depth on that. So with that, I'll look for a motion just to receive this report.
So moved.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, that brings us to the end of our open agenda. Our next meeting is June 24th. If I can get a motion to adjourn our public meeting.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?